Cool. So we're trying to determine differences between the ZAP Python files that come with the ZAP Docker image, yeah?
Yep.
Cool. So I don't know where this conversation will take us, but let's see. So I've got the baseline on the left and the full scan on the right. And let's just quickly go through some of the changes. So the active or the full scan on the right excludes a few more rules, presumably these active scan rules. The baseline scan allows you to ignore warnings. I don't know if that's important or not. So we've got the minutes here. So this is the minutes that the spidering is time boxed to. So on the right, it looks like it's infinite, and on the left, it's time boxed to 1 minute on the baseline scan. That's just the extra option for ignore warn. There's ignore warn again.
I think the ignore warn might just be an oversight between keeping these scripts in sync.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't think they get a lot of love.
Yeah.
Is my guess. So on the full scan, you can see that they're automatically installing the beta active scan rules. And if you use the ZAP alpha option, then they're obviously installing the active scan ones as well.
And so this is one of the key things here, right? Is like on the full scan, it's including the active scan rules. On the baseline, it just doesn't have those rules installed.
Correct. Yeah.
And then I think somewhere else, it's going to actually tell it to use those.
I mean, what you suggested in terms of just combining these files and being done with it, in theory, you could merge that back to, you could push that upstream. I don't think these files need to be separate.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the things that I was curious as to why these were separate, because you could probably do all of this as a single command line parameter that says, do I want to run whatever you want to call it, a baseline, active, passive scan. I think a cleaner way of thinking about this is you have one Python script and you pass in, hey, am I running a passive scan or an active scan or an API scan? And then everything, then you just have a couple if statements as to which scan you're running and which rules you load in.
Where that breaks down is that an API scan, it's not really a new kind of scan. It's just a way of figuring out the attack surface.
Right.
So essentially all this is duplicated again in the API scan, but there probably is an if statement about, do you want to do an active scan?
Yep.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So the parameters they pass, they're just installing these. I think we went through that earlier. On the right, this looks to be sanitization of the target URL. I'm not really sure what this code does off the top of my head. They choose a different policy. So the default policy, we can actually go and figure out what that is. If I quickly... Just gonna start Docker, run TIRM. What have I done? Okay. Now I think in the home directory, home ZAP. Have you seen any of this stuff?
The policy stuff?
Yeah.
Or, hold on.
Cool. So these are the policies.
Yep.
Here's our policy. Everything is a medium, by the looks of it. I'm not sure if that's everything is a medium or only report mediums, but that seems to be the policy that the active scan or the full scan uses.
And the baseline scan doesn't have a policy, is that correct?
I actually don't know. I suspect it probably uses one by default. I mean, it may even use the default policy by default. I don't know.
Are those, can you just take a look at one of the other policies just to see how they're different? So it just sets it to low. And
Yeah.
these are not incredibly helpful because they don't show you how each of the different rules are set up.
No. Yeah. So where were we? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a default policy that's set up. So it enables all scanners with that policy. Maybe it's enabling all medium level ones. I don't really know. We'll need to look into that a bit more. And this is where it actually triggers the active scan.
Yep.
Now, the interesting thing here is that, so this is where the spidering happens. And if you have the AJAX option set, this is where it actually starts a browser and does an AJAX scan. So this is finding the attack surface. But
right.
You can see that this wait for passive scan only, well, it seems to finish after this has been triggered. And what I interpret that to mean is that while an active scan is taking place, so it's making new requests and trying to probe for more information, it's probably passively scanning that as well, is my guess.
Okay.
So then I'm not actually sure what this does. This might just be part of printing it all out. Oh, I think it is. Yeah, this is all the printing stuff, I think. Just printing to the screen what happened, basically. Yep. Oh, and apparently you can have detailed output. But beyond that, this should all be the same.
Yeah.
Print, stop.
So really those couple of lines that we just went over, that's the real difference between these two scans.
Correct.
So if you just scroll up a little bit. So it's, that's output.
Keep going.
But if you, yeah, so it's really this piece right here.
Yeah, that's the guts.
338, yep.
Yeah, because I mean, realistically, we'll probably copy all the output just to make sure that anyone who's reading it doesn't see a change, but our information will come from the API anyway in terms of generating a report.
Yep.
If I show you the API scan though, and say I compare it to the full scan.
So I think you may want to compare it to the baseline.
I can do that. So I've got the baseline on the left.
I think those are closer.
Okay, so there's a few differences. Oh, interesting that.
So yeah, there's this idea of safe mode. We'll skip the active scan.
Safe mode is something, I haven't worked out what safe mode is, but I think it's important. I noticed that when you start ZAP, this mode is essentially, you can set it to safe mode. And I'm not sure how it protects you and what it does and doesn't do. But it is some level of protection against something. So it's probably something worth looking into at some point.
Yeah, I wonder if that is a, well, I guess it could occur in two places. It could occur at the plugin level where it just doesn't allow certain plugins if they're self-classified as attack plugins. Perhaps it could also just be at the proxy level. It seems easier to do at the plugin level. Yeah. Maybe there's something in this code that shows us how it's working.
Yeah, maybe. So the big changes here are target can be a URL to a specification file.
Yep. There's
a format property, which is Open API or SOAP, although SOAP is not supported because they removed the plugin from the marketplace. You can override the host name, so there's another option, and obviously this safe mode. So the API scan can do a baseline or a full scan. But the baseline scan can only do a baseline scan, and the full scan can only do a full scan. API scan can do both.
So one of the things that's interesting here is line 106 on the right says it will skip the active scan rule or skip the active scan. But it doesn't have the blacklist of the active scan of the full scan files. Remember, there were a couple, like 2 or 3 additional rules.
Yeah, you're right. It's missing them.
Now, when I looked at this earlier today, I didn't see any active scan going on in the API. But maybe we can find it.
Let's go through it. So these are the options that they set. We've got baseline set to false. We don't have any of the ignore warn stuff, and there's no AJAX spidering because obviously the way you determine the attack surface is by reading the specification files. That's not required. This safe mode just sets baseline to true, so that doesn't actually seem to be related to this at all. But let's keep going. Host override, that's just another property that lets you override the host in the specification. Okay, so there's a bit of making sure that we've got the property set correctly.
Yep. I
should mention too, in our scripts, we're always running in Docker. So we'll often see if else, if running in Docker else, we can just ignore the else.
Yep, okay. Yeah, so we saw this in the other one. It's just some URL cleanup. Making sure that the URL, the target starts with HTTP. It makes me curious why it doesn't exist on baseline. It could just be an oversight.
Well, either way, I think they should work the same.
Yeah.
It seems plausible to think that they should.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess here it's a little bit more confusing because they've used the same property for 2 different purposes, one, which is the URL of your website or the API specification.
Right, right.
Which is a bit unfortunate.
Yeah.
So there's no spidering configuring because we're not spidering. Start ZAP as normal.
So what's interesting is you're not setting a value for the spider, but where do you actually load in the spider?
On the right?
No, on the left.
The spider is this is baseline, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. So on, what is that line, 324, 325?
Yeah.
Whereas you're never calling ZAP spider on the right.
I don't think so, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
So all this stuff is non-Docker, I think. Yep, so we can ignore all that.
Yep.
Which is good. Happy days.
And do you know what those file, those are, it looks like copying. I saw that somewhere else.
These, it looks like they're just setting up these scripts. And you can see here, it's copying the API minimal policy as well. So I think we use that policy, which we'll
right.
in a moment.
Yeah.
So so trigger hook ZAP started, that's good. Now you can see here, one thing that happens is on the left, we call ZAP access target. And on the right, we don't. And that's actually a problem because we actually need that hook in DAST code. So one thing we actually do at the moment is, where am I? Wrong project. One thing is we actually inject it in using sed. We literally change the code and we put it in.
Yeah.
Not ideal. Is it that one? It could be another one, but
yeah,
you get the point.
One, but, yep.
Okay, so where were we? We're at access target. Yeah, down here. Yeah, so you can see this one never actually accesses the target.
Yep.
In theory, I think it should, but okay. So now we're loading scripts and we're enabling them. So these are community scripts that are essentially vulnerability definitions that are specific to API scanning.
Right.
And if I look at, as an example, what one is, basically, it's like if your REST API returns content type other than those, it's a vulnerability. Which,
right.
I mean, personally, I think is probably a little naive, but
yeah,
maybe that's useful. Maybe it's useful if people could configure it themselves.
Right, right.
All right, so now we're actually going through importing the API file, the API specification, and this is either done using a file in the ZAP work directory, or it's done using a URL.
Yep.
And it's not the script that actually imports it itself. It just tells the ZAP server to import it based on where it is. So that's kind of nice. We've then got this hook for importing SOAP. We don't use any of this. No.
And this is only taking one URL on line 374.
Line 374.
Yeah.
It's choosing the target. So in theory, all the URLs that are defined in your API specification will be for the same host.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just choosing one of them and working out the target, so the host, from that. Is how I read that.
The reason I'm asking is we have a separate issue about just giving DAST like a whole list of URLs. They would be the same host, but say go to page 1, page 5, page 10. Those 3 URLs we'd want to pass that in.
Yeah. So ZAP has a feature, import a file containing URLs.
Oh, there we go.
So I just think that's an alternative way of determining the attack surface.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. So that's exactly what we'd probably use.
Yeah. And there's no reason why you can't do all of these things together.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of what the distinctions between these scripts, I think, are a little bit arbitrary because it's really just conditionals, right? Like, and I think maybe you ran into that with, there's something that the API scan didn't have. Oh, the exclude URLs. Yeah.
And the reason for that is I wasn't able to get it running in a context. So ZAP has this context.
Yep.
And basically in the context, you can exclude URLs.
Yep.
I wasn't able to run the API scan in a context with the code that we have.
And is that an intentional difference, or that may just be an arbitrary difference that we're not sure why?
I don't know, to be honest.
Okay.
It also just could be because I didn't understand it well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So it just needs more time for us to investigate. But certainly I think it would be easier if these things were all in our control.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is, when you set this up, again, it's like, hey, do you want to run active or passive scan? Do you want to, how long do you want to time it out? What are the list of URLs that you want to do? And you can just set all those settings, as opposed to right now we have that full scan. And then if you want to change that, you've got to go through some kind of weird way of overriding the command line. And I think we're flattening that out. We'll move those to environment variables. And ideally, you basically go through one script here, and you just set all your settings that way.
Yeah. Yep. I think that'd be great. Should we continue?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't need any of this stuff because we don't support SOAP.
Yep.
Because they don't support SOAP, as in ZAP.
Regarding that, so I think the other question is like GraphQL and I can't remember. There's one other one that we were looking at. We would implement that similar to these. We just have to design an engine that would support those. Or
correct. So, I mean, GraphQL essentially has a schema. You can go and look at so essentially when you publish a GraphQL endpoint, you're also publishing the definition of all the terms and types, and there's no reason why ZAP couldn't parse that and start creating. You could create an active scanner that could go and create run it against a whole bunch of different endpoints, and try and create unbounded queries and try and create mutations that are basically SQL injections, and it's a whole bunch you could do.
Yep. Okay.
Be fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So no URLs exception. So I don't know why target would be I mean, this is the same target cleanup that we saw earlier in the full scan.
It actually kind of looks like it's too late in the process.
Yeah, it just seems to be for, oh, so they normalized it. Yeah, I don't know much about this, to be honest.
Yeah.
But this is one of the risky things for me in terms of just combining them all in one step, because I think you would run into like dragons like this and you'll be like, what is that? And I wouldn't want it to hold up all the rest of the good work you've done.
Yeah, so take a look, like on the left, it's got the same if statement. And then the target gets reassigned a little bit. But line 400 on the right, old target equals target. So they're not normalizing it, I don't think, the same way. I'm not sure what line 400 is doing on the right.
Me neither. So this seems to me that they're spidering from the root of the target. So if you pass in a target of, http mysite.com/foo, it'll spider from mysite.com.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so on the right, you'd have to figure out, are they using old target anywhere?
Yeah. Oops.
No, they're just using it for logging.
So it's just logging. Okay.
And this is kind of like, obviously these scripts were maintained separately. And so you've got these little quirks.
Yeah. And this is another quirk too, because this this is delaying the active scan, not the passive scan.
The active.
Is that right? Maybe it's just delaying both.
So it says delay active scan. Oh, and then line 418, it's...
So actually, I think what's happening here is as soon as you tell ZAP to import the URLs, it's starting a passive scan. So it actually goes and requests them all at that time. So that's actually happening in the background.
Right. This is interesting. Line 414 is saying if there's a configuration. So you have to have a configuration.
Yeah, which you can generate. It's one of the options.
Yeah.
And I think it just prints out an XML file with all the vulnerabilities and what levels they should be. Something like that.
Yep. So they're adding all the active scan rules, and then 424 is running the active scan. So where do the regular scans start? You think once the URLs got imported?
Yeah, right here. I think so. That I believe that parses the API specification file and also triggers GET requests.
Okay.
Or post requests if you've defined it. Although I doubt ZAP could actually make a post request because it wouldn't know what to put in the body. But yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
That's where I think the passive scanning starts there.
Yep. And then it starts an active scan at 424, 425.
Yeah. So you can see it does both. We've got this separation of baseline and full scan for an active versus passive scan there, but the API scan is doing everything.
Cool.
Let me just have a look at the API minimal. So this looks to me like it's disabling a bunch of vulnerability definitions. I think that might be what those numbers are.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that is the most bizarre syntax as opposed to using an attribute.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Like, why would it not be P, plugin ID equals, 40009?
Yeah, well, it means a disadvantage of this approach is you can't define a schema because your schema is dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, as long as they stick to it, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. But yeah, exactly. There's no schema for it.
Yeah, I think you find this is generated by some code.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can do this in the web interface. And we can play around with that if we wanted to, but it's just weird that that's the format that they chose to generate it in.
Yeah. So I suspect what they're disabling in the scan policy are, things like, a lot of the checks they do with forms and anti-CS, what are those called? Cross-site script forgery tokens and all that kind of stuff. You know how,
right.
Stuff that is specific to targeting someone on a web browser.
So yeah, so that's a good point. So what's running here is all the active scan rules. And then the scan policy is shutting some of them off.
Yes. Yeah.
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 And so the scan policy, I think, is one of the things that having some way to manage that in the web interface would be really nice. So particularly if you're getting a lot of false positives, right? For example, like, let's say there wasn't an API minimal and you just ran default and we got all these cross-site forgery scans. We might want to say, okay, these are all false positives. Let's shut them off and create a new policy for the user.
Yep. Yep.
And then certainly I'm sure this helps performance as well.
Yeah, you mean it doesn't take as long to run.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Yeah. You want to keep scrolling down here?
Yeah. So I don't really understand why they're changing the scan policy to default, although that was the same default policy that we saw in the full scan when they ran an active scan.
Oh, that's.
Basically, they're saying if you specify your own configuration file, use the default policy. I don't know why that makes sense, but
okay.
It's just, yeah, we'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
After this, I'm pretty sure it's pretty much all the same. So this is all printing. You'll probably find that this is exactly the same as what was in the full scan Python file. And ditto for this stuff. And dump log file. Interesting. So that's where we're at. I should say too that on this pre-exit hook at the moment, we listen to that hook and we just go system.exit 0. We skip all this. Right. We don't exit based on the number of failure counts or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of this script that we would probably just rip out once we're ready.
Yeah.
And the script will end up being pretty short.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like the first steps suggested is basically essentially copy all this print stuff into our code, or at least make our code print the same format. I'm not suggesting we actually copy it. And pretty much just move this trigger hook up like to here.
Yeah.
Because after here, it starts getting a little gnarly, but the first stuff we can just chunk off.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what the suggestion was, though, however it ends up happening is.
Right. I mean, the other thing to do is, I mean, I guess there's a bunch of ways. Take some of this duplicate code and just throw it into methods and start getting rid of all the duplicate code. That way you can really narrow in on what's different between these.
Yeah, true. But it is untested. Like,
yeah,
we don't, like, we test we test these now. So we have
Yep.
tests for our reports. We don't test whether the config is generated correctly. We don't test the output of the job in terms of what vulnerabilities are, the way it prints them. We don't test, there's a whole bunch more stuff. We don't test any of this config stuff, even though we've made it available to people to actually use.
Yeah.
So it's not without
Yeah,
risk.
and it's, I don't know how much of that we have to keep consistent, right? Like if we're expecting people to parse our logs and things of that sort.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So
yeah.
We'll have to figure that out.
One
Cool.
thing
I think that
one thing I haven't gone into is this file, which all three of those depend on. So this is just the common thing. So it's got functions like start zap.
Yep.
And it's got like the spider stuff, zap spider. This is where you actually find the definition of those things.
Yeah.
You want to find it, that's where you look.
Yeah, and I think one thing you could do is probably take some of the stuff out of those other three scripts and move it into the common, just as a cleanup if we go down that route. But
yep.
Cool. I felt like there was one other thing we were going to look at on here.
I wonder what that was.
Yeah. Do you want to open up the web IDE and see where the policies are? And see if we can...
The web IDE? You mean this?
Yeah, sorry. Yep.
I haven't gone too much into this, to be honest, but let's...
So it's under Analyze, which is a very bizarre spot. Up in the top top menu bar, and then scan policy. And I think, yeah.
Cool.
So here's your default policy. And so this is your default alert threshold.
Oh yeah, that's the attack. The attack strength is what I was talking about with how much you let your active scanners, how many requests you let them make.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you don't have a API policy.
No.
Are you able to find this on your file system?
I don't know. Where would I look?
Oh man.
That's a great question.
You can search your Mac file system for default policy, whatever. What was it? Default policy XML or something?
It's not in here, is it? Can you?
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
Plugins.
Actually, go back. I know where an easier way to find it. If you go back, yep, click on ZAP and then say import, and that might default to the folder.
Nice.
I think that's it. So library application support.
So in theory, it should be in here.
Yep, there it is. So I don't know if you can copy the API policy over there.
Oh. Where are these? Home, ZAP, .zap, policies. Okay. Let us see. GitLab DAST. I can't see because of the...
Yeah, so there's your API minimal. And then it's on the, yep.
And that was in...
application support, I think. Try library. And then...
Damn.
I don't think, if you do it through the command line, Applications, library applications.
Oh,
support ZAP.
it's in my home directory. I thought it was in there.
It might be hidden.
LS applications, or is application like, can't remember. Users CAMSORD's library application supports ZAP. So in theory, it should be library application support ZAP.
And what's ZAP versus ZAP-D?
Great question. I don't know the answer.
Okay. Maybe it's a Java convention.
Policies. Policy.
And actually, before you just close ZAP and relaunch it. And I'm wondering if it reads in that entire folder. Not that this makes too much difference, but.
I'll see.
Aha.
Nice one. I don't know why.
So import probably just puts it into that folder.
Yeah.
Is there no way to do an API scan in the GUI?
There is. You just import the API definition. So as an example, I could probably start. I don't know if I've actually got this working.
But what's interesting is it's going to run the default policy, not the API policy. So the API scan is, the command line version is going to give you different results in the GUI.
Yeah, I also find this quite confusing because the options are different. Like, does this let me override the host name like we do in the API?
Right.
Remember how in this guy, it's got the -o. It's got this.
Yep.
Like, is that what this is? I don't know what target URL is. Yeah, I never really quite.
Well, and so when you go to in the Python script, it's doing all that work in the Python script, not in the ZAP API, not in the ZAP tool. You know what I'm saying?
The -o.
Yeah, so if you look at how it's using -o here.
Yeah, which one
so, yeah, host override.
-o, host override.
So see, it's changing the URL on line 366.
It is, but it's already imported it. So we can go to.
Okay. So ZAP is doing the work.
Potentially. Let me just go and look at the API.
Which would make more sense if they're doing the same thing in the GUI interface.
So this is
the GUI
API. Import URL. Open API. Import URL. Host override. Yeah, they're sending it. So it's the ZAP server doing it.
Yep. Yeah, which is nice because that way you've got consistent behavior between the GUI and the command line.
Agreed. Agreed. Anything else we should go over?
Yeah, can you just pull up the I just want to take a look at that real quick in the web interface, in this interface, so if you go up to analyze policy and just open up the API minimal and hit modify. So that's set to medium.
I'm kind of curious to know what that is.
Click on injection.
2 secs. This controls how likely ZAP is to report potential vulnerabilities. Oh, if you select low, more potential issues will be raised. High. So basically, it gives you a bit of control over whether you think it'll be false positives or...
Yeah, and if you go look at some of the Java code, there's basically like, should I run more tests? The Java code says, hey, should I run more tests? And it looks at that value.
I think that's that, though.
The attack strength.
That's should I run more tests? That's should I report what I found? By the looks of it, but I don't know why they'd have that. And you can also, in the context, you can have alert filters. So I don't really...
Yeah, the context is my next thing to look at to understand this a little bit more.
I don't know why you would define it there and define it here, but...
Right. Well, I think it may have to do with when it gets processed. So the policy is at the plugin level or the add-on level. So the add-on is actually going to work differently, whereas the filter may be after everything comes back, you can actually reduce the amount of noise.
Okay.
Right.
So did you want to look at the context?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. So the one that I was looking at was technology and how that's being used.
So I know they define all these technologies. I don't know how well each vulnerability definition or rule abides by it.
Yeah, and that's what I want. That's the piece that I have to look into is, does a add-on query and say, hey, I'm only going to run this add-on if they're running a specific technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. I think it's very well worth exploring.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Do you have the Java code on your machine?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could search for, let's say, something like MongoDB.
I'll search in ZAP extensions because that's where all the that is where the rules are.
Mongo, I think capital DB.
Okay, I'll search the whole thing.
So there it looks like, what was that line? Yeah, where did this come?
So this is tech.java. So presumably this is where they've defined them all.
Yep.
Let me just find one that's a bit more. I just don't. Whoops.
I mean, Windows would be a good one, right? Like,
where do you see that line? Oh, here. So it's only used here, but I don't understand. Unless my...
Are those enumerate? Yeah, so go to Windows. Yeah, see the test path traversal. And where did it have those Windows paths?
Yeah, this is an example of the attack strength. Low, medium, high. Yeah, so I guess at insane, it tries 4 different paths.
Right.
Levels. Sorry, what was your question?
In the search before that you had for Windows. So, oh, here it is. Line halfway down. Technologies include. Keep going down right there.
Targets command injection.
So this is exactly what I thought. So if your technologies include Linux, Mac, or Windows, it's going to run this.
Oh, cool. So actually, these are all the guys that implement it.
How many of them just say return true?
Yeah, well, exactly, right? Oh, no, that's okay.
So
SQL
this is
injection. You would expect SQL injection Oracle to search for Oracle, wouldn't you?
right. So if you know you're not running Oracle, you would shut that off. And then it's not going to run that.
Actually, this is, I think, pretty accurate because abstract plugin, which they must all extend, returns true by default. So I think you would only override this when you actually had something to say. So buffer overflow is only C. Presumably that's only Apache, code injection, ASP, PHP. C. I mean, maybe people use that on, but I would have thought it'd be fairly rare.
So code injection is only those two? So can you go back to code injection real quick?
Yeah, this is it.
So
you want to see what it does?
Yeah.
So it's debugging, test PHP injection. Send and receive message. Bingo means actually raise an alert. I'm trying to, often they define it at the top of their code. Here it is. PHP payloads.
I see. And then there's an ASP payloads, right? And those are ASP. Wow, that's old.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the technologies are.
Yeah, because can you go to the list of technologies? ASP. Wow.
I wonder
so
if
they don't have like .NET, ASP.NET. They don't have Ruby.
Well, here's the thing, right? Because on the UI, I'm pretty confident I saw Ruby.
Oh, there's Ruby. As a language.
But it's not here. It should be here, I would have thought. Maybe my code is out of date? But it can't be that out of date.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I wonder if you have a Ruby extension installed in your
My marketplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Can you remove that?
It already was. Actually, no. You're right.
So that's just installed.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily expect this.
Oh, it removed it. No, it's still there.
Still there, yeah.
I can't imagine that. I mean, a really nice architecture would allow you to put that in there, but.
Yeah, but I can't see.
Can you search this file for Ruby?
Yeah, weird, hey.
Or what if you search
your
your entire
ZAP 2.7? How did I manage that?
What's the file? Tech.java?
Oh, this is a jar file. Let me go to, where is this? Paros constant. Why would they have more than one? That's really quite strange. So they depend on all the old versions? I don't understand that. Unless that's just my project being set up strange. Well, maybe different extensions depend on old versions because they haven't been updated.
Yeah. So what's the name of the file? It's tech.java.
Yeah, but you can see it's this is founded in the 2.7 ZAP package. So it may be that Ruby's only been added recently. Yeah, I don't know where it is.
Yeah,
So, this must be the old file.
Yeah, so the tech.java on GitHub has it.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. So I think it's just a version issue.
Oh, it's moved. It's that model tech.java. Fair enough. Unless I was just looking at the wrong file. Yep, I was looking at the import, not the package.
Oh.
But still, it's pointing to the wrong one.
So that is being used. That's cool.
ZAP model tech.
Which one were you looking at?
2.7.
Oh, okay. So previous version.
Yeah. Okay, so
what's interesting is what they've chosen in here, right? It's Ruby. It's not necessarily Rails.
Yeah, well, it's a language. It's not a. They don't seem to. They have web servers. They don't have application servers.
Yeah.
Which seems a bit odd to me. Because application servers. I mean, I think Tomcat is an application server, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably more just like what people wrote.
Yeah, yeah, it's what the community.
They wrote some add-on that
yeah.
exploits, one thing in Tomcat, so they added Tomcat in the language.
Yeah, which makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that it's because I would imagine Rails and Django and each of those things has their own exploits.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sure even PHP, you could probably get into individual frameworks there too.
Yep, definitely. And JavaScript.
Yep.
And all of them, yeah. But I mean,
cool. But yeah, that's nice to see that it is being used.
Yeah, although it does show you that you look at some of the plugins and you're like, oh, I wish that was better.
Yeah. Yeah, you basically just need contributors to own one of these plugins and really make it robust.
Yeah.
Yeah, just bring up this idea of what our default should be. I mean, I don't know how expensive, like your ASP or your Mongo or your Couch or one of those are. But certainly if those technologies are not used in your company.
Why test?
Right.
Mind you, I suspect that my feeling is that turning this on or off wouldn't make too much difference to your tests at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we just looked at the ASP one, right? And those were like 3 injections. Now, I don't know if that's 3 times on one page and then that's done, or it tries to do that on every page. And then the other question is, how does it know it's an ASP page? Like to try that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's from you clicking this in your context, right? I think that's as simple as it is.
But does this mean, for example, if you do an active scan against GitLab, right? It's going to try, and you leave this as the default, it's going to try all those ASP injections against GitLab?
Yep.
But is it going to try those on every page that it finds, or?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. I would have thought
that might be something worth benchmarking, because let's say you run this against GitLab, I think when Greg ran it, it took a day or a day and a half.
Yeah, which makes me think it does.
Yeah, in which case, you know what? You run this against GitLab, because we built GitLab, we would know like, okay, let's run Ruby. Let's not run the ASP, the C, the JSP, all that, and then shave quite a bit of time.
XML.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
I assume it would shave a bit of time.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, this was helpful.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can take that first video and post that over to the DAST channel. So Camilla's got that, and Derek.
Happy if I stop recording?
Yeah.